what I want to go through today, as I said before, if you if you heard me, was the invoicing side of things, and we are just going to run through some of the kind of pre-invoice checks and also the actual invoice process. So I'm going to log into my screen now, and hopefully you can see the Prima screen when it comes up. And what we're going to cover is, how do I know that the stuff's ready to be invoiced, the actual invoice process, and communicating those invoices to the customers. Okay, so essentially what happens is Prima, for the best part of things, works based on you delivering orders to the customers and marking those orders as dispatched. So throughout Prima, you go through the standard sales process, and at any one time, however you invoice, whether you do it daily, whether you do weekly, or whether you do a monthly invoice run, what would happen is you would go through the relevant steps and generate those invoices. So I just want to make you aware of some of the things to just bear in mind when you do that invoice run. Hopefully it's in your kind of housekeeping routine, and if it's not, then it's just a bonus to say, right, okay, we can look at this now. Okay, so first of all, when customers are coming to go through an invoice run, what I would always suggest doing as a first protocol before you've even considered going into the invoicing area is to just make sure in your SOP and orders section, for the given period that you want to invoice, make sure that all the stuff that you have in your list of orders that you think you're going to invoice is at the relevant stage in Prima. So what I mean by that is, if I look at the orders that I've created here, so there's no particular status, I've got my status column here, and the status column in Prima is really important as a driver to show what's going to be essentially available for invoicing at the time. So the situation that you want to be at is everything for the given period that you're going to invoice is at a status of delivered. Okay, if the status is not delivered, then it means essentially that it's not going to be ready for you to invoice at that time. Okay, unless it's obviously already invoiced, in which case you've already done it. So my suggestion would be, as part of your housekeeping routine for your invoicing, whether you do this now, hopefully you do, and if you don't, I suggest we put this in place, is look at your status column when you go to run prior to running your invoices, because it will give you a good indication of what can be invoiced at any one time. So what you have is, in your status column, there's various Prima statuses. Pardon me. And throughout the order stage, you want to make sure we're at delivered. So anything that's not delivered, you can access quite easily in Prima now. So what you have is, as an indicator to say what can I invoice at any one time, you've got a drop down list in the status here to say not invoiced. So I can look at my not invoiced stuff, and it will give me a list of orders that have not been invoiced, or essentially a line on those orders that's not been invoiced, because Prima takes the status of the lowest line on the order, if you like, and that becomes the overall status of the order. So for information, if we run down here as a list, we're just looking at these at random. Picked means something's on a delivery note that's not been dispatched. Ordered means the system believes one or more of the lines on that particular order are on back order. Delivered is ready to go. Requested from this list here means that something on that sales order, as it stands, you may not have purchased it, but it believes that that item needs to be purchased and pushed through the system. What you essentially want to arrive at is a position where all items on the orders are at a status of delivered, and then that updates the overall status of the order. And at that point, you know that order's ready to be invoiced. Okay. So you'll essentially end up with a list like that. It won't be as drastic as this, I'm sure, but if you did this exercise prior to your next invoice run, if you've not tried it already, it might highlight some of the things that you can say, actually, we've delivered that. Why is it not showing? Why am I not invoicing that, essentially? So I'd always recommend running this as part of your invoice process. Once you get into the habit of doing that, the invoicing will be much more up to date and relevant, and you'll be invoicing the most you can at any given point, and that's essentially the situation that we want to arrive at. So if you do find one of these is, for example, ordered here, and that's showing that it's essentially one or more of the lines are on back order, you can obviously access that sales order. If I go into it, where have we got access that sales order, and each line itself has a status. So I can see here, I'll look at the column, I'll just move it across. One of the items has already been invoiced, but the system believes one or more of the items are on back order, at which point I can go through to the line into my links, and I can see, okay, so what's not been finished on this item. So I can see there's a receipt note outstanding for this. So I would want to complete that. When I complete that, that item will then be available for my dispatch note to be completed, because this would have been a pre-book item. Complete my dispatch note, and then this will show as available for invoicing. Okay, so that process would be repeated for as many lines on here that you've set for not invoiced. Okay, so that's essentially the first part of it. So always, I would say, get into the habit of doing this process. If you're managing the invoicing in Prima, get into the habit of checking that you can invoice as much as you can at any given point. Okay. And once you've done that, then you kind of onto the standard process. Now it works slightly differently depending on our customer base. How you choose to do this. Some of our customers would be the case that the people managing the warehousing would complete the delivery notes. Some of our customers would be the kind of office kind of sales order process people. Staff would be completing the delivery notes once they get the delivery notes back from the drivers. And some of our customers, it would be the accounts team that would be responsible for completing the delivery notes and making the stuff available for invoice. So what you need to do is, in your movements and dispatch area, to make anything available for invoice in Prima going on your standard invoice profiles, it needs to be marked as dispatched. So if you go into movements and dispatch, and if I search for anything current, so if I hit enter, I've got one that's in transit here. I want to dispatch that and mark that as complete, so I can run my delivery notes. So I need to set it to confirmed and mark it as dispatched. Okay. Let me just check what else we've got in here. Okay, so I've got some old stuff in here as well. So what I'll do is I'll just try and complete a few more of these, just so we've got some information in the dispatch area. Alright, okay. So there's a few receipt notes outstanding that we need to just book in first. Let's have a look what we've got outstanding. book some stuff in. So this is coming back to, again, all those orders that we saw on the sales order area that were of various statuses showing on back order, not showing as picked. And I'm just going to complete some receipt notes here, and then I'm going to go back to my dispatch and just see what's available in here. See what's current, and see if there's any of these that I can dispatch. Okay, so I've dispatched a couple of those, and some of them were left outstanding because the receipt notes were done. So you would be going through and updating the dispatch notes to basically say, this stuff has been dispatched and I want to invoice it. And that's it. That's it, really. You're getting the stuff ready, and then Prima, based on the customer's invoice profile, will present that stuff available for invoice if it's available, if it should be available. Okay, so into the invoicing area, what happens is in Sales Invoices, you've got two sections. You got the first bit as you go into the screen, and that's the existing invoices that you've already generated. But what you have here to generate the invoices is your available lines. Okay, so I just go into available lines. The way the invoices work in Prima is you have a company profile set, and 99.9% of the time you would use that company profile to generate your invoices. And what you're saying is, this customer is invoiced monthly, this via a merged invoice, this customer gets an invoice per order, this customer gets an invoice per delivery note, this customer gets a merged invoice per location. And you need to tell Prima how that customer is going to be invoiced, because that drives the generation of the invoice in the first place. Okay, so what I'll do is actually I'll step back and I'll find a customer. So if I go to, let's go compare account and just get rid of that. Okay, so if I take this KPMG account and I go into it, so for the benefit of people who've not seen it before, within the company record, you have the customer tab, and the customer tab is where you set up all the invoice parameters, if you like, against the company. So how does that customer want to be invoiced? So the invoice profile is a merged invoice, and there's various options in here, and we've found over time that this is the list that kind of suffices for the industry. So for the majority of your customers, what we find is you will set them to invoice by order, and then you may have the larger accounts whereby you would have it merged, but you also have the option to merge in different ways. So you can merge it by a delivery point, you can merge it by a customer cost center, you can merge it by the department, or a PO number. So if they give you a monthly PO number, for example, you can use that. So Prima needs to know this information. What you can do now is, in the admin, you can set, when you create a company, you need to provide an invoice profile, and you can also set in the admin for the setup of the company what the default is. So that's important. So in versions gone by, when you created a company, by default the invoice profile was no invoice profile, because you basically needed to tell Prima how you wanted to invoice. But now you can kind of set that by default, and if you need to change it, then you can go into it at a later time. Okay, so Prima needs to know this information. Are they going to be invoiced weekly? And they also need to know how you want the customer to receive that invoice. So the two things that are important in Prima is an email or a letter from the invoice medium. The rest of them, it doesn't really have any effect on the system, but these two are really important. We would obviously advocate customers using the email, and we'll look at that shortly. So I've got my invoice profile here, and so I'm just going to minimize that, and I'm going to come back to the available lines. So my advice is, when you generate the invoices, leave it by company profile on the basis that you've actually got one set up against the customers there. So the other search parameters that or search filters that you've got in here, you can go by company, order number, dispatch note, by delivery date. So some of our customers, what they would do is they would say, right, all the dispatch notes that were dispatched within the previous month or within June, for example, show me those, because that's the stuff I want to invoice. I want to do June's invoicing. So you've got the option to do that. We've got some customers that have requested, and this is a relatively new field, to exclude support contracts, cash sale, and web orders. So you do your block of stationary sales, if you like, and then if you run service contracts, support contracts through Prima, or you have a cash sale account running through Prima, then you can kind of handle those separately. You don't have to, but the option's there now. Okay, so honestly, I wouldn't advocate using anything other than the company profile here. The whole point of running Prima via the invoice profile in the company is so you arrive at this point, and what it does is, when the items have been dispatched based on what you've set against the company, it will arrive in that format for you to invoice. Okay, so there's various columns available in here, and this will just give you information about the lines that you're going to invoice. I often get the question from customers about what the first column actually is for. So for those of you who don't know, this IASP column, what it refers to is where that invoice line has been generated from. So for the most part, you guys will see an I in there, and that just references it's come from sales orders. I don't know what the letter kind of schema, how it was generated, so I can't comment on that, but I know what they mean. Okay, so A is for sales orders. I is for sales orders. A is for FSM support contracts. So if you run support contracts in Prima, then you will see that against the support contracts. You will see a B in there, and they're not even all referenced in the column header. There's a few more than that. So a B is for FSM, where you've got separate invoices set against the FSM, and that will make sense to people who use the FSM. You've got an S. So these are invoices that have been generated against the own account, and to be honest, I don't see really any of you having that situation, so you probably won't see that. P is where you've set up a payment schedule. Now, this was a feature that was in the previous version of Prima, and we've not really seen a call for it to be, I guess, included back in, but you can log that as an enhancement request if it does. And then you also have a T in there, so T is externally paid. So that's what it's for, that column, for anyone who's interested. And it was just a kind of out of interest thing. To be fair, most people, as long as they can see the lines in the invoicing, it might have just not even been noticed, I guess. So I'm just going to search for whatever's available to go onto an invoice at this time. Okay, so I've got stuff that's coming from, with that in mind, I've got stuff that's coming from FSM, so I can see an A. So I've got support contracts in here that can be invoiced at the time. I've got support contracts where they've chose to have separate invoices. and I've got I, which is relates to the sales. Okay. So what you also have is this thing called a related ID, and the related ID just is basically telling you what kind of invoice it is. Whether it's what you need to know essentially here is if you see the sales order number in here, that means it's an individual invoice per the order, and if you see a -1 in here, that's relating to your merged invoice customers. So I can see here that KPMG, one invoice is going to be generated with 18 lines on it for a value of 25,000 net. Okay, so generating the invoices itself is actually straightforward. All you need to do is highlight the ones you want to invoice at any given time and create the invoice. So if I highlight one, create the notes, I'll get an outstanding invoice. Okay, now I could have done all 5 of them at that point. I've just got one here, just so we've got an example. It doesn't matter essentially, and what will get brought through is all the invoices that you create at that time into this screen. At that point, you can then complete them using the complete button here, and you can assign a date. If you need to enter into the invoice, you just double click and open the invoice. If you need to check something or change the price, why it's outstanding or anything, you can do so. But what the majority of our customers would do in this instance is highlight the lines, complete, and then when you go into the complete area, you would be choosing a date. If you don't select anything there, it'll just use today's date. But you could, if you wanted to, backdate the invoices, for example, and then you just mark complete selected. Okay, so bearing in mind that the products have all got the right nominals and such, the invoices will complete. So you get a notification there to say it's confirmed the invoice, and that invoice is then complete, and you're at the point now where you can communicate this to the customer. So at this point, you've got a couple of options of how you do that. Most of our customers, I would say, kind of do the manual route at the moment, from my experience, but we are trying to promote the batch process functionality of the Prima Cloud version. So if I show you this, and then if you've got any questions about it afterwards, then we're happy to answer those questions. Okay, so if you use the print or email function, then what you're saying is, I'm going to choose at this point whether I print to my printer or I email it to the customer. So if you want to print it at this time, then you can choose your number of copies. It'll find a local printer, and then what it'll do is, it's saying the report type is the defaults here. What it's looking at is what your customer has got set as their default report. So each customer now in Prima can have a different layout. You could have an individual layout per customer if you wanted to. And it's just saying it's going to print whatever's set as the default against that customer. If you want to define which actual report it is, then you can choose from the available list, yeah, and run that print. You can preview the report at this point if you wanted to take a preview. If I go into the preview mode, some people go into here. I've obviously not got any branding and things on here. So once you're in the preview mode, you can send it and save to PDF and stuff directly from the preview mode. So as an example, if you wanted to produce a copy invoice from the lookup screen for a customer, you could be doing this, and then you could check it, make sure it was okay, and then email it to the customer directly from the preview. Okay. If I choose email from the list, I'm essentially doing the same thing. I still choose the reports that I want to send. I can leave it as the default, and what it'll do is it will try to email to the relevant email address. Now, if I haven't got an email address, then essentially what you do, you create a draft. So my suggestion on that is make sure that every financial contact in your database has got an email address whereby it's a customer. So what I mean by that is, if I just leave this screen open, if I go into company and contacts, and I bring down my search filters, so if I choose who's the financial contact against my, let's have a look, company type is a customer, and customer status is current, and I will search for these. So these are my current customers. So these are my financial contacts that I've got set. So I've defined the financial contact. Now I've got a bit of a problem if I want to email the invoices out to some of these customers, because there's no email address in here. Okay, so as an exercise, whoever's running the invoicing, I would certainly do this, and certainly if you're looking to invoice via email to the customer, I mean, it's literally a case of, if you find a blank one, obviously contacting that person and getting the information, but you can go into their account and making sure that the email address exists in here, and then you can just move on to the next one in the list that hasn't got one. What I did notice in here, which might help some of you if you're not aware of the feature already, or the functionality as such, I've got here a contact whereby we have some customers whereby they would want to send it to their customer, but more than one contact. So if you use a semicolon to separate two email addresses, you can send it to more than one contact within the business. It'll still be referenced in terms of the address to whoever the financial contact, in this case John Smith, but Steve, as an example in here, would receive the email as well if they just need it as a reference. Okay, so that's an option if you know it needs to go to more than one person, because by default it's just one. Okay. Yeah, so just coming back to this, I mean, I would certainly suggest having a look at that. So just looking at the settings there again, from my customer list, anyone who's marked as a financial contact, I've put current customer in here, but you may not have that set up, so you can do a search that works for you, but based on the financial contact, and basically sort it on this column to make sure that you've got your email addresses sorted. Like I say, we want to push people to use the email bit because it's much more efficient and cost effective than printing and packing envelopes to send out to customers. Okay, so just coming back to the invoice. I don't know if I left it open here. No, I didn't. Okay, so we looked at the manual process, and then what there also is this batch process functionality as well now. So it's relatively new to the cloud function, and essentially what it does is it looks at what you set against the customer in terms of their report layout. So you set a default report layout for that particular customer. Has it been printed yet? So Prima looks to see, has that invoice been printed yet? And in Prima, printed means emailed or printed. If that's N, as in no it hasn't, then it will appear in this list saying we are expecting to send out this invoice layout to this customer via either the action here references print or mail. So what it's saying is, when you come in here, it's got all the information that's taken from the customer. These ones have not been printed or emailed yet. Start the jobs, and on doing so, Prima will send to the printer the ones in the right format for that relevant customer, and email the ones in a relevant format for that customer, and just basically ripple through and do them all in one go, increasing obviously your efficiency on the invoicing process. So we would definitely kind of advocate looking into this to improve your invoicing process if you're not using it already. You can actually go one step further than that in terms of, via the admin, you can set to auto email. So what happens is, when the status of the invoice changes from completed to posted in Prima, without you even needing to go into batch process, it will automatically send, for the customers that it's set to in the company record, the invoice out automatically, and all you would see in the batch process area is the stuff that's left to print. So that's the kind of highest level of the automation, if you like, on the invoicing process. What we found is a lot of our customers don't go for that kind of final level. They have the batch process, but they still like to go in here and check that we've got X amount going out for print and we've got X amount going out for email. Okay, so this, just bear in mind, this will be at any given time. When you come into the batch process, this is just the list of invoices that are set to not printed, if you like. Okay. When I was talking about the default reports, what I was referencing here is the different report layouts. So for anyone who's not yet seen that in Prima, if I go into the company record here and go into the main section of the company record, you have here a button called default reports. And basically what it means is, whenever you produce a copy of a particular type of record in Prima, what does that customer receive in terms of the layout of the report? So for an invoice, these guys would get the consolidated cost center report. For a credit, they might have a certain type of layout of credit. If they like the quote with images, there's nothing to do with invoicing, but it's here, you can choose a particular quote that you want for that customer, and Prima uses that as part of the batch process. Okay, so really handy feature, because you just don't need to think about it. You set it up once against the company, and then Prima just uses those settings. Okay. So I'm going to come back to just in the invoicing area itself. Obviously, you would use the main lookup screen as we've got here to access any invoices that you have in the database, as you would any normal lookup screen in Prima. So I just get rid of the filters that are set in here and just search. This is my invoice list, and should you need to produce copies of invoices, etc., you can access these at any time. You've got your standard list of search filters and your advanced list of search filters as well, and you can open the invoice at any time. Obviously look in, and then you've got your report tab within the invoice if you need to produce a copy of it. You can do it from the grid as well, if you click the print or email if you want to produce a copy. And yeah, being in the invoice, that's I suppose pretty standard, because all the information will be driven from the sales order. Okay, you can raise manual invoices in Prima. We don't see it happening that much, but should you need to, you can raise a manual invoice if you just need to put a value onto a customer's account. New record, sales invoice. And then you can put a reference in, so delivery charge. can assign it to a location and a contact as normal. So I get an invoice, and then in the lines tab, I would put my invoice line on. So just click on new record. What's the description? Delivery charge to be added, and then you can put the values in as you normally would. £12. Don't know if I'll get away with that. And I can save that. And then in the general details, you can assign it to the relevant nominals. So I might have a delivery nominal, for example, in here, and the department would be office, etc. Cost center, if you need it for the reporting purposes, you can assign it to the relevant cost center. Who is the rep? And if there's multiple lines on this manual invoice, we don't normally see that would be the case, but if there is, you just in this section, and then you just click new to add a new line, and you can repeat that process. Okay. When you're ready to go with that invoice, you just mark it as complete at the top. Give it a date, and that's it, and it's done. So in the same way, you can come in and then print a copy if you needed to print a copy and send it to the customer. Okay. So the lookup essentially is similar to what you would expect. I just wanted to mention on the credit side of things, this I forgot to mention it. The batch process side of functionality works for credits as well. So if there's a list of credits for a particular customer that have not yet been printed or emailed but are completed, then they will show. They will show in the list as well. If you go into invoicing and credits, you can use the batch process function in that area as well. Okay, so that's essentially a run through of the invoice module as we see it. I'm gonna obviously hang around for any questions that you guys have got. So I believe some people are on the chat already. So please continue to do so, and I'll hang around for any questions as well. I'm just thinking before I finish, do I want to cover anything more in the invoice lines? I think we're okay. What I'll do is I'll hang around for any questions from our customers. So thanks again for your time, and the video will publish to the YouTube channel as normal. I apologise again for the technical blip at the start. Hopefully you guys hung in there and